Advance directives. Do you have them? When do you need them? Who do they direct? In advance of what? The Texas State Legislature made some sweeping changes in our advance directives last year. Stay with us and find out what they are on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hi, I'm Chuck Meyer with Austin Metropolitan Ministries Austin Faith Dialogue. We're going to talk today about advance directives with Linda Rushing. Welcome to the program, Linda. Glad that you're here. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved with advance directives?
Well, I work for the Texas Conference of Catholic Health Facilities. The advance directives have been a priority for Catholic hospitals and the Catholic Church for some time now. So when the legislation was proposed last session, my organization was a natural to be a part of the group that eventually did hammer out the legislation and get it passed.
Maybe we ought to start with what are advance directives? A lot of people don't know or have misconceptions about them. Could you say sort of generally what they are?
Right. People are always asking, well, first of all, what does it mean? Well, an advance directive is a document that you fill out in advance of a serious illness that directs your health care provider, your family, or your surrogate, meaning someone who will step in and make decisions for you, as to how you want your health care handled when you can no longer make a decision for yourself.
So it's kind of a way to put in writing what your wishes are, maybe what your values are regarding treatment in a really critical or even end-of-life situation.
Exactly. That's why they are so invaluable, because it does tell people what it is that you want done, not what somebody else wants done.
So what do they do and what do they not do? A lot of people may think they do more sweeping things than in fact they do.
Well, an advance directive only becomes effective when you are unable to make a decision for yourself. So you could be comatose, or you could be in advanced stages of Alzheimer's or some other condition that would leave you unable to make those decisions. In that case, it will direct the care provider either to apply certain kinds of treatment or to withhold certain kinds of treatment. Traditionally, advance directives had been documents that directed a health care provider, generally your doctor, what not to do to you, that you did not want to be on a ventilator, or you did not want to be, as we call it, technologically tethered. You know, you didn't want to be hooked up to machines. Now, after last session's legislation, advance directives now provide for you to be able to ask your health care provider to provide treatment, that you would like treatment until a certain time, until it becomes no longer feasible or some such thing.
Maybe we ought to walk through what they are. It occurs to me also that people really need to know that healthcare facilities, whether it's a hospital, like St. David's or Seton, or I guess nursing homes as well, are required to ask anybody coming in by federal law. We're required to ask on admission whether or not you have advance directives, what they are, or what their intent is. Is that right? Exactly.
And it's not just federal law. State law requires that also.
Okay. Well, let's take them one by one. Let's take first. Let's take living will.
Okay. People call it a living will. In the law, it's called the Directive to Physicians and Family or Surrogates.
Now, that's a change in the law, right? It used to be Directive to Physicians.
Directive to Physicians, right. The reason that it was changed was to let everybody know exactly who it was a directive to. It's not just to the physician anymore. It's to your family and to your surrogates.
That's a lot clearer than the other.
It is clearer. Unfortunately, most people refer to them as living wills.
Living will, right.
And we did talk about changing the name, but several of the doctors that were active in the coalition asked that we not change the name, that we leave it a directive to physicians, because they wanted their colleagues to understand we are directing you what to do at the end of life. We're not asking, we're telling.
We're telling. So the person that fills this out is saying, here's what I want done. If I'm in a critical or terminal or irreversible situation, right?
Exactly, and that's new.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
That's one of the major changes in the law, the irreversible condition. Texas had never had a definition of irreversible before. So until September of last year, when the law became effective, you had to be terminal in order to have your advance directive become effective. And that meant that, and at that time, 2 doctors had to certify
right.
that you were incompetent and unable to make your own decisions. So as of September of last year, the law has changed. Now it is 1 doctor, and that's in recognition of the fact that there are a lot of places where it's very difficult to get 2 doctors to come in and examine a patient.
Now they're certifying that you have a terminal or irreversible condition, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yes, they're not certifying that you're incompetent. They're certifying that you're terminal or irreversible.
And terminal means?
Terminal means that you have a condition that will cause your death within 6 months.
Okay.
Now we use a longer definition, but that's it in a nutshell. And we use the 6 months because that's what the federal government uses, what HICFA uses when somebody goes into hospice. Somebody can be certified to go into hospice if they are considered terminal within 6 months.
Okay.
So that's where the 6 months came from.
So terminal is one, irreversible is the other.
Is the other.
That's really important change.
That's a major change for Texas, because until now we have not been able to cover the Nancy Beth Cruzans and Karen Ann Quinlans of this world. If you remember, those 2 young women both ended up in permanent vegetative states, technologically tethered, and their families were absolutely incapable of doing anything to help the girls other than just leave them hooked up to the machines.
Well, it's not those situations as well, but the frail elderly too. You may have somebody who may be, I don't know, in their 90s, who may not have something that's actively causing their death, but they may just be frail.
Exactly.
And they may not want to be to have major extraordinary treatment.
That's right.
At the end of their life. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. I talked to a lady who was 88. Who had severe Alzheimer's, carried the oxygen tube around with her, and had 3 heart attacks, and had a very long, very happy life, and all she wanted to do was die and be with God. And if somebody was going to take that opportunity away from her, again, she was not very happy about it. So she was very happy to have the new definition.
The new living will.
Yes.
Right. Well, talk a little bit about more about that, because there's some more changes in the living will as well. You can say if I'm in a terminal or irreversible condition, I want to be permitted. I think what's it say to die as gently as possible.
Yes, to allow.
Check that box.
Yes, to allow a natural death. What is the whole idea behind it? But there's a second option now, and that is that you can ask for treatment. And that is new, and I believe that Texas is still the only state that has such an option. It's rather unusual for Texas to be in the forefront, don't you think,
That's great.
of human interest legislation.
Wonderful.
But, and this, in all honesty, is in recognition of the National Right to Life and Texas Right to Life groups, which felt very strongly that there are some people who don't necessarily just want to have treatment terminated, that they want to be able to ask for treatment.
That's really, we talked about that a little bit before the show. That's one of the really beautiful things about the legislation is they were able to get a group of people together for totally disparate views, from the Texas Right to Life group to the Hemlock Society, I mean, and all sit around the same table and come to agreement about this legislation. It's just, it's really
when you think
good piece
of
of
the
work.
Diversity there of opinions, to think that everybody was happy with this legislation is a major milestone.
And that all these interests were addressed of all these groups. It's well done. Well, let me pursue the living will. Okay, so you've filled this out, and you've said I want to be permitted to have a natural death, as gently as possible. And your family, however, now is saying, we want you to keep going here. Tell me about the futile treatment provision of this.
Well, the futile treatment provision is also very new to Texas, and we are also, as far as I know, still the first state to have it. The futile treatment provision works in the following manner. When there's a disagreement between, say, the family and the doctor, then the first thing that we do is we ask for an ethics consultation. Most hospitals have ethics committees, as you know. We both happen to sit on some. And if you're in a long-term care facility, then you can have a medical committee meet, and the law provides for that. So you have an ethics consult, and the ethics committee listens to both sides And the ethics committee doesn't technically decide anything,
Right,
but they either
right.
agree with the doctor or they agree with
We
me.
agree this is futile treatment, or no,
Or
we
not.
think it's not futile
Right.
treatment. Okay.
So let's put this into concrete terms. Let's say we're talking about my mother's treatment. So, and I want the doctor to continue treatment, and he or she believes that it's futile treatment.
Right.
Then we go to the ethics committee, and they're either going to agree with the doctor or they're going to agree with me. Now, if they agree with me, that's the easy one. Presumably, there's another doctor around that will take my mother's case and will provide the treatment that I want provided for her. That's the easy one. The difficult one is always when the ethics committee says, we do agree with the doctor. This is futile treatment for your mother, and it's not helping her. Then what happens is, if I still insist upon treatment, they give me written notice, and they put the written notice in my mother's chart, and at that point the clock starts ticking. And I have 10 days to find some place to transfer my mother. Now, that's not my responsibility. That's the facility's and the doctor's responsibility to find some place to send her because they have the contacts and I don't. That's the reason that it's on their shoulders. Now, transfer costs are my responsibility, but the...
And during that 10 days, we keep treating in
Absolutely.
terms of maximum effort. And then at the end of the 10 days...
And if anything goes wrong in that 10 days, they have to keep her alive.
They have to keep her going.
So,
that the 10 days is up, now what?
Well, at the end of 10 days, the law just says you have to keep her on treatment for 10 days. It doesn't say you can withdraw it. It doesn't say you have to withdraw it.
But you're no longer the facility and the physician are no longer obligated to provide anything but comfort care.
That's right.
Right.
That's
so
right.
they could legally now withdraw all but comfort care and allow natural death.
Yes.
That's pretty sweeping change in the law. And have people done this?
Yes, it's been used rather frequently, interestingly, in various parts of the state. Most often what happens is exactly what you coalition.
Right.
We talked at length about what would probably happen, and what's happening is exactly what's happening. It gives people an opportunity to talk about what's going on and to come to terms with the fact that their loved person is going to die. And once they are able to accept that, very frequently, they just needed a little bit more time. And once they have that time, they're much more comfortable with the situation. I only know of one case where somebody was actually transferred to another facility, and as soon as the gentleman was admitted to that facility, they started their own 10-day procedure. He was that far gone.
Yeah, okay. Now, one quick thing is that just because you have a living will doesn't mean you're what's called a DNR, do not resuscitate.
Oh, no, different things.
No, I mean, you and I go in the hospital this afternoon, why? For an appendectomy or something, and
Right.
something happens, we hope that they're going to resuscitate us.
Chuck, people are very, very confused about that. They think that if they have a directive to physicians or a medical power of attorney, that if they say have a heart attack, that
Nobody's
nobody
gonna do
will.
anything.
That's right,
Right,
and they
that's
totally
right, yeah.
misunderstand.
Yeah.
First of all, a doctor has to certify that you are terminal or irreversible, and that and then it becomes effective. No, that doesn't mean that you are denied treatment.
No.
Never means denial of
we
treatment.
need to change the kind of negative spin on this. It's not signing your death warrant. It's really saying, here's what I want done if, in fact, I'm in this sort of situation.
Exactly.
Well, we're going to take a little break here, and then we'll be back for the second half of the show. Stay with us. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue with Linda Rushing and we're talking about advanced directives today. We've spent the whole first time talking about just the directive law. Talk a little bit about the medical power of attorney also.
Okay.
And why that's important.
The only change really in the medical power of attorney is the name. It used to be called the
Durable power of attorney for health care.
for healthcare, right? I always joke that only a lawyer would name a document something like that.
Right.
Being a lawyer, I'm dissing my own profession. But the name changed to a medical power of attorney because that's what everybody calls it, is medical power of attorney.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this does what?
It allows someone to make decisions for you when you are unable to make them yourself. You do not have to be terminal or irreversible.
Right.
Just incapable of making your own decisions.
So if I'm either unconscious or I'm brought in from a car wreck and can't say what I want, then if I designate you, then you're the person that makes, you become me.
That's right.
That's a very important part to remember, too.
That's a very important
You're not
part.
you're me in this. So you really have to know what I want and guard that.
Yes,
right?
it doesn't help to fill it out and never tell a person how you feel about things.
Right,
Never.
right.
And I'm very careful to tell people that you have to understand that it's the other person's wishes that need to be carried out.
Well, then, very briefly, well, then, why do you need both the directive and the medical power of
I
attorney?
think that you
or
do
just
need both,
one?
and I recommend very strongly that people have both for this reason. If you have the directive to physicians, and nobody's ever talked to you about, you've never talked to the person about what you want done, then that does guide your treatment. It gives people an outline of exactly what you wanted done. And it's very important to have the medical power of attorney because you can be in a situation that you're not terminal or irreversible. And one of the best examples I can give you, the one that I always use, is being burned terribly. You can be burned over 80% of your body and you can live. But if, and I joke about this, but it's nothing to joke about really. If that ever happens to me, I don't want that to I don't want to be put through the treatment. I want nature to take its course. But without my medical power of attorney, and without my sister being able to say, who is the number one person on my power of attorney, without her being able to come in and talk to the doctors and say, this is not what she wanted, then they're going to treat me.
Presumably people would continue to aggressively
Exactly.
treat. Okay. Well, what about the out-of-hospital DNR? And people may not know what DNR means. In medical facilities, DNR usually means do not resuscitate. Although, very interestingly enough, you and I both know that many places are changing from DNR to AND, from do not resuscitate to allow natural death.
Right.
So what's the out-of-hospital DNR?
The out-of-hospital DNR is a document that the health department has constructed in accordance with the law, and it is available through the health department because it's not something you go to your lawyer's office or whatever and get, and it's not something you get from. It's something that your doctor has to sign off on before it becomes effective. Unlike the other two documents, they are effective as soon as you sign them.
You
and
also
as soon
don't
as
need
they're
a lawyer
witnessed.
for the other two, right?
You don't need a lawyer for any of these documents. You really don't. Although many lawyers do include them in a will package as a matter of courtesy.
Estate planning, or
Exactly.
Yeah.
But whatever you do, if you have one, you should never leave it with the lawyer, ever, because then it doesn't help. If it's locked up in the lawyer's office, the person that needs it is your doctor and the person who has your power of attorney.
So what should you do with them? You fill these out, then what do you do with them?
Well, you should keep a copy. Don't put it in your
safe deposit box
and leave it there.
I'm going to put it in my safe deposit box, and we'll open it 2 weeks after you need it, and say, oh, that's what you wanted done.
Exactly.
Right.
And that is what happens,
I know.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
You should always give copies to the people that you have named as your surrogate decision makers. The person that you name as your in your medical power of attorney. I made copies and sent them to my doctor to be included in my medical record. There are copies at work, and there are copies at home. I joke, fill them out and drop them from airplanes.
Oh, yeah, really, put them everywhere.
Put them everywhere.
You certainly want your next of kin, you want your family to know
Absolutely.
that you've done these. As somebody told me one time, they said, these are personal decisions, but they're not private ones. And it's a really nice distinction. These are very personal issues and personal values and what you want done, but they ought not to be private. We ought to be telling family members, tell your physician, tell whoever's going to be making these decisions for you.
Unfortunately, we live in a culture where people don't talk about death.
Right.
Nobody wants to mention it. The son doesn't want to mention it to the mother because he's afraid that mom will think that he wants her to die. Mom doesn't want to mention it to the son because son will say, oh, Mom, don't talk about death. consequently, as you well know, somebody ends up in your facility without anybody having any idea of what somebody wanted done.
Now, one of the other issues is that people often don't know what happens during a code and what the outcomes are like. One of the places that our viewers can look is on the lastacts.org website. You'll see it on the screen. Lastacts.org is the national website for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It has a lot of information about end-of-life care. We're also going to put Linda's email address and my email address. If you'd like copies of advanced directives, email us and we'll be glad to drop them in the mail to you. Also want to get a mention in, there's a real important program that we know is coming up in September, the Bill Moyers program, to encourage people to keep an eye out for that, September 10th through 13th,
10th through
I think
13th.
it is, 4 nights in a row. Well, why are these concerns to people of faith? I mean, this is Austin Faith Dialogue, so why do we think these are issues that we need to be talking about here on the air?
Well, you know what? I think I'll punt that question right back. You're the one that's wearing the collar.
Back to you, Chuck. Well, I think there are spiritual issues, and then there are kind of legal medical issues, and this may be the place where they intersect. That people of faith may have some ideas about what they believe death is or afterlife. I talk to churches all the time. It's like I always ask, in fact, I'll ask the people out there, would any of you who have advanced directives, please raise your hand. That's a very interesting small number that we're looking at. It's
10% maybe.
10% maybe. So it's like everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die to get there. A little connection shot right by
Well,
them.
you know, the last time I looked, death rate on this planet was 100%.
100%. 1 out of 1 dies. I
That's
know.
right.
So I think it's important. It's almost like it's not just putting your legal and medical wishes in the document, but it's making a statement about your spiritual values, I think, as well. What if you don't have advanced directives and you get into the situation? Does the state law list who says
Yes, and that's
who gets to
always
make
been the
decisions?
case, really. There are people that can make decisions for you, and the law is specific, has a laundry list. It starts with the spouse, reasonably available adult children, and then, and I don't remember what follows after that, but there have always been provisions for someone to be able to make decisions for you without having to go through a court to get a temporary guardianship.
What about under 18? Do people under 18 need advanced directives?
Well, until you are 18, you really don't have the right to make a decision for yourself. Your parents always have that right until you're 18, and 18 is the age of majority in Texas. Now, if you had a child who was terminally ill and was certainly capable, and I would not cut it off at any age. We know that I'm sure you've dealt with 10 and 12-year-olds who are very aware of what's going on and very insistent upon what their treatment should be. There's no reason why a child could not discuss those treatment options, but the document, you have to be an adult to fill out the document.
How do you approach people? I mean, have you had people ask you, yeah, I got elderly parents, what do I do? How do I raise these issues without frightening them?
Generally, what I tell people, it always seems to be the case, you're so afraid to bring up the subject, but as soon as you do, your elderly parent breathes a sigh of relief and says, I've wanted to talk about this for so long. And we really do need to talk about it. You know, back in 1950 or even in 1970, this was not the issue it is today.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have ICU, we didn't have 911, we didn't have cardiac monitors, we didn't have all this stuff.
Right.
And so people basically knew what a good death looked like. They knew how we died.
Exactly.
And now we've medicalized it and treated it as one more illness to be cured.
And you know what's really sad, Chuck? People think that they have to do everything to keep their parent alive.
Right.
Because if they don't do that,
Then
then
they
they're
haven't
not
done
a good.
enough.
That's right. They
You're
haven't
right,
done enough. And yet you see somebody. You take an 85-year-old woman who's had her. They're pounding away on her chest, cracking ribs probably. The doctors will tell you that exactly that. And what's the outcome of that? I mean, you and I both know that the chances of you, if you've had a full code, the chances of you leaving the hospital are less than 5%. Is that not correct? So
survival to discharge is less than 3%.
Less than 3%.
Right.
So you're going to put your beloved parent through that kind of agony for what?
Yeah. Well, let me also, again, try to turn this around. We've been talking a lot about the advanced directives in terms of death, but I think this is not just about death. This is really about quality of life and
Yes.
what parts of life are important to us. What do we value? Do we value communication? Or do we value life and life alone at the end of, as you call it, the technological tether, where you're tethered to machinery? It really raises quality of life issues, and that's something for Faith Dialogue.
And you know, we're very social human beings, are social at their core. So to die unconscious, tethered to a machine, is not a part of really what we would think of as being a social being.
Right.
Whereas you and I both know the statistics. They've done so many surveys. People want to die at home with their loved ones around them.
Right.
And the alternative to that is hospice. I have a dearly beloved aunt who died just about 2 years ago in hospice. And if a death could be good, that was a wonderful death. She died sitting on a bed with my mother's arms wrapped around her and one of my sister's arms wrapped around her. It was such a beautiful way to go, where as opposed to being hooked up to a machine for another 10 days.
I think the issue, as I hear people talking about it, is they want to make sure that they've done enough. And one of the ways that I can make sure I've done enough for you is to know what you want. And that gets back to
Communication.
do the advanced directives and do the communication.
Communication.
We've just got a couple minutes left here. Let me ask you, what about the future? Are we looking at more changes in the advanced directive law in Texas?
Well, the coalition is going to start meeting again in September. There aren't a lot of things that need to be changed. There are some, anytime you have legislation that's of this magnitude, and it was a very large bill, there have to be some, things you find out later that things don't quite work the way you thought they were. One of the things that that I know that we're going to talk about changing is that right now the law provides that you have to be competent in order to execute a directive. But you can be incompetent and revoke it. Which means that you can spend all of that time and sometimes money and a great deal of emotional commitment into filling out these directives and be incompetent and revoke it.
For instance, if you had Alzheimer's and while you were still pretty competent, you filled one of these out that said, I want to die as gently as possible, then you became incompetent and you said, no, that's not what I want. So you're talking about one possibility might be that you could, we might change the law to say, where while you're competent, you could say, if I ever become incompetent, I want this to stay in effect.
Exactly.
Right.
I think that we'll be looking at that. And some changes, I think, in the out-of-hospital DNR. So, and while we were speaking of those, I didn't mention that the Do Not Resuscitate order now, it's called an out-of-hospital DNR, but it applies in the emergency department.
I was going to say, yeah, thank you. That's
and
good.
In outpatient facilities and in the doctor's offices.
So the ERs are out of hospital.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you've not been admitted to the hospital.
Well, Linda, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Really good information. And again, email either one of us for advanced directives and join us next week on Austin Faith Dialogue.